This is Andi Purewal for Boxing News. I am joined by Dan Rafael. Dan, it's always a pleasure to catch up with you. How's life over in the States treating you?
All is good. And you know what? I just realized it's the first time we've done it since you guys became Boxing News. So congratulations on that deal. It's good for boxing, I think. Good. It's exciting.
I appreciate it, Dan, and I would like to think it's good for boxing as well. Certainly exciting times ahead. And yes, here we are. Before we get into kind of a nitty-gritty of what's going on in the boxing world, there's a few fights which I'm sure you'll be keeping a close eye on over the weekend and your side of the world. I think the one which is certainly I'd argue that the most entertaining one that I'm certainly most looking forward to is Ortiz and Stanionis. Just talk to me about this fight and the pressure certainly on Virgil Ortiz because of what could be around the corner for him.
Well, it's a great matchup. I mean, I love this fight ever since they made it. I think there's a lot of at stake for both guys. Obviously, Stanionis comes in with the secondary title. Virgil's the undefeated fighter, as a Stanionis, but he's the one with the perfect knockout record. He's also the one that's in his home area fighting in front of his home fans. And the winner of obviously is going to be the mandated fight for the winner of Spence and Crawford. Whether it will happen or not, still remains to be seen because they have a 2-fight contract. The winners, whoever wins the first fight or maybe the second fight, will probably end up moving up in weight. But the point is, the winner of that fight will end up becoming most likely, at least a little while down the road, the only WBA title holder in the welterweight division. And it's just a really exciting matchup because they're both, in their primes, young guys in their 20s. Both had good amateur careers. Stanionis was in the Olympics, but Virgil was also a top American amateur. They both have punching power. They both have faced, decent opposition. Virgil probably a little more better guys, let's say, than Stanionis, but I don't sleep on either one of these guys. It's a really good matchup that sets the stage for some excellent fights on paper anyway for the rest of the summer. But what I think is interesting about it is, it's been postponed twice because of ailments to both fighters. First, you had the issue with Stanionis, who had to have an emergency appendectomy. That was back, I want to say, in January, which postponed a fight that was supposed to be in March. Then it was postponed again because Virgil had a relapse of the blood issue that he had that caused his fight last year with Michael McKinson to be postponed. Now supposedly everybody is in good health, thankfully, and they've got this fight happening. And listen, I think it's a can't miss fight. I'm very, very much looking forward to it. I haven't had a chance to talk to Stanionis, but I did speak to Virgil Ortiz in an interview that we played on our podcast last week. And he really talked about, quite a bit about what he's been dealing with in terms of his health. And I think we all knew that he had the issue before the McKinson fight that caused it to be postponed, and that was giving him problems. What I had not realized is when he spoke about it, he said that he had a bout with long COVID that was what was exacerbated the blood disorder, and that he really hasn't been 100% or close to it even for like his last 4 or 5 fights because of COVID situation. And he said he was about 60%. And by the way, at 60%, he was knocking guys out in dominating fashion, not losing rounds. And it wasn't like he was fighting bums. He was fighting pretty solid guys. I mean, Samuel Vargas has been in the ring with a lot of guys. Maurice Hooker's a former world champion. Kavaliauskas, was an Olympian who gave Terrence Crawford one of his tougher fights. I mean, he was fighting, a pretty solid group of fighters in that group. Plus McKinson was undefeated and a pretty slick boxer. So for him to be able to pretty much, beat those guys, pretty handily, at what he estimated was around 60%. If he's, even close to 100%, it's going to be a tough night for Stanionis. But by the same token, Stanionis is probably better than all of the guys that I just mentioned. So it just shapes up as like a great fight.
I think the McKinson one's an interesting one because certainly from a British boxing perspective, everybody's always seen him as certainly a top level operator, very awkward fighter at that. And as you mentioned, the difficulties that Virgil's had to overcome and to go through that fight, come out with that stoppage victory was just as impressive. I saw his comments as well about how he was kind of thankful that Michael wasn't a puncher.
Yeah.
Going into that fight. So if he was to come back in at 100% against Stanionis, again, it's one which everybody's expecting a firefight. Would you echo that kind of those thoughts and those feelings that you expect this just to catch fire sooner rather than later?
Well, listen, having watched pretty much Virgil's entire career, having seen numerous of Stanionis's fights, including his most recent fight against Butayev when he won this regular WBA belt, that was a slugfest kind of war on a pay-per-view undercard. So yeah, I mean, they're both come forward guys. They both have good power. I think both take pretty decent shots. I mean, I honestly I can't see it being anything other than a good, entertaining fight. You know, there's been so many good fights already in 2023 that I don't know if I will tell you it's going to be the fight of the year, but I think it's going to be worth everybody's time to tune in.
Dan, obviously another big fight taking place in America this weekend. We see the return of Jaron Ennis, Boots, and Romain Villa. An interesting fight again, so something which everybody's expecting to kind of catch fire at some point. What are you expecting to see from Boots, and how much of a factor do you think this lack of activity might play?
Well, I mean, Villa and Boots both were on the same card together in against separate opponents in January. So neither one of them has had a long layoff, and both of them are coming off those wins. The difference, of course, is that with Villa's fight on that card, he beat a very close fight, a very game effort by Rashidi Ellis, a fight where he needed a knockdown in the final round to really secure that victory in what was a very quality fight, a good fight, a close fight. The difference, though, on the same night, Ennis had his fight against Karen Chikadzian, the Ukrainian fighter, and Chikadzian basically tried to stink him out for 12 rounds and, moved and didn't throw a lot of punches, kind of covered up and kind of held and made it a very frustrating night at the office for Boots Ennis. But he still won, basically 12 rounds to nothing and got those rounds in. Although most people have expected, based on the competition level that the other fighter had faced, that Boots would get rid of him in a few rounds, and it didn't happen. But nevertheless, there's nothing wrong with going 12 rounds once in a while to know you can do it. So this fight, though, because of the style that Villa has, I actually spoke to Boots Ennis also for our podcast recently, and I asked him about the difference between going from the kind of opponent he had in January to a much more offensive-minded, come forward, be in front of you kind of fighter, the way Villa is. And, I was doing a Zoom with him when we were doing the interview, and he was smiling and he's sort of licking his chops because he feels like that Villa is going to be right in front of him. And as he said to me, and I quote, "I'm going to have a legendary performance." So, he knows that the fight in January, although he won every single round, so it's hard to kind of be critical when you win every single round, right? But he knows it wasn't the most crowd-pleasing fight and that it maybe left a few people with some question marks. But now he's the main event. He's fighting in his home area. The fight's in Atlantic City, New Jersey. He's from Philadelphia. It's about a 40-minute ride down the highway to get there. So he'll have it'll be a big crowd for him at the Boardwalk Hall. And, I expect Boots to turn in a good performance. And also, like Virgil Ortiz and Stanionis, they know what else is going on in the weight class. Boots knows what's going on in his weight class. He's going to be the IBF. He's already the IBF's mandatory challenger because he holds the interim belt. And everybody who's a contender or a secondary title holder like Stanionis, or in the case of Ennis, the interim title holder, they're all waiting for Spence and Crawford to sort of clear the decks and figure things out, because they're the next group. They're the next generation. Crawford and Spence are obviously the top fighters in the division, but they're not really of the same time frame of the guys I mentioned, Stanionis, Ortiz, and Ennis, who are the younger guys. So they have to sort of bide their time, wait a little bit. But once the dust clears, so to speak, from Crawford and Spence, those are the guys we're going to be looking at the top of the division. So Ennis is going to have this fight. Stanionis and Ortiz will take care of their business. And I mean, if you look further down the road, I mean, it's boxing. It's hard to say what will happen, especially when you're fighting on different networks and for different promoters, et cetera. But certainly a very appealing fight, I believe, to boxing fans would be if Ennis wins to eventually fight the winner of Stanionis against Ortiz. I mean, that's kind of pie in the sky stuff at the moment, but the fighters are aware of their standing in the weight class. Matter of fact, when I spoke to Virgil and when I spoke to Ennis, they mentioned each other, in the group of other opponents. So they're keeping an eye on each other. I'm pretty sure that, they've got their business to attend to on Saturday, but when they're done, they may go take a look at what the other guy did. So, it is exciting in the welterweight division. We've had the same guys around for a long time, whether it's Crawford, Spence, Thurman, Danny Garcia, there was Amir Khan and Kell Brook, and, plenty of good quality fighters. Ugas is still there. Pacquiao was there for a long time. But this is that next group who are coming behind them. And the three guys, anyway, that are in these upcoming fights all have, great potential. Even the guy that loses between Stanionis and Virgil Ortiz, not like they're done. Guys lose. It happens.
I think certainly, if you look at the landscape, it'd be safe to say that the welterweight scene is dominated by the American population, shall we say, and that's headed, of course, by the Spence-Crawford fight. Let's get into that, Dan. One thing I'm interested to get your thoughts on is kind of Errol Spence's lack of activity, the issues he's had outside the ring, such as the car crash and his eye injuries and what have you. How much of a factor do you feel like any of this will play from fight? I know it's difficult to say because we're not there, but do you think that could play a part?
I don't think so. And I say that because after he was in the car accident, which was in the later part of 2019, about 3 weeks after he had an excellent victory in a tremendous battle against Sean Porter to unify two of the titles, that's when he had the car accident. He was out of the ring for quite a while afterwards. Probably a little over a year, I want to say. Maybe it was a year and a half or so. I don't remember the exact amount of time, but it was obviously a substantial layoff. When he came back and fought Danny Garcia, if you didn't know that Errol Spence had been in a terrible car crash that easily could have cost him his life, you would never know that he missed any time in the gym or in the ring. He looked phenomenal that night. He didn't get a knockout, but who knocks out Danny Garcia? So he went in the ring and he put on a clinic against Danny Garcia. And again, if you didn't know that he had been out of the ring for a year and a half or so because of this terrible car accident, it would never even dawn on you that there was a problem. So there was no issue there. He came back, didn't look like he missed a day. Now, if you fast forward to what happened when he had the fight against Pacquiao canceled on him in the last minute because they found the torn retina and he had to undergo surgery. And of course, Ugas filled in and took his place and beat Pacquiao. And so when Spence was able to return, again, another long layoff, I think probably about a year, came back in the ring. And he didn't just beat Ugas, he beat him down. He dominated him. He knocked him out. He messed up his face. He broke his orbit bone. Like, again, Errol didn't look like he missed a day. There was no, in my estimation, there was nothing that looked like there was any kind of diminishment of his abilities just because he had an eye surgery or going back before that he had the car accident. So he has shown that has not impacted him whatsoever. So I don't expect it to have any impact at all. And I mean, and he's not the only guy that's like that. I mean, when I go back a few years, remember covering like Floyd Mayweather. Floyd had retired for like a year and a half or however, it might have been longer than that. I don't remember exactly the amount of time. He came back after his lengthy time in retirement and fought Juan Manuel Marquez, who was one of the pound for pound greats in the Hall of Fame. He shut him out. I mean, he beat him easy. It wasn't even a fight. Totally dominated. Never look. If you said Floyd Mayweather hadn't fought for a couple of years, you would never know that. And I think Errol Spence is in that category. He stays in pretty decent shape. He's obviously a great boxer. He's got a good team. He's motivated. And so I don't think if he loses the fight to Crawford, however it goes, I don't think that you're going to hear from Errol Spence talk about, well, I had the long layoff or I had this or had that. I mean, remember, he could have fought sometime at the end of last year or at the beginning of this year, but he purposely didn't take an interim fight because he didn't want to let this fight with Crawford get away from him. And once you start scheduling other fights, things have a way of messing things up. Crawford went and took his fight earlier this year because he hadn't fought since the Porter fight, been about a year. But I don't think the layoff for him will have an impact. And Crawford has not exactly been the most active guy either. Yes, he did fight Evanesian not that long ago, but it wasn't like it was a strenuous fight for him. I think both these guys are highly motivated and ready to go. I can't wait.
There's a lot of talk about, we've just spoke about the welterweight division, the future of it with the likes of Ortiz, Stanionis and Boots, amongst others. Whoever comes out on top at the end of July, do you think that the likelihood is they'll look to vacate and move up?
Well, they do have a 2-fight deal. I mean, that's been well documented. There is a rematch clause that goes both ways. It's not just where one guy can exercise it. It's whoever loses has the right to ask for an immediate rematch. And so, given the amount of interest in the fight, given the money that they can stand to make against each other as opposed to somebody else, you never say never. I mean, obviously, if it's I don't think this will happen, but if it was some crazy first round knockout or a guy got seriously beaten down and just didn't want to ever see the guy again, it's possible there wouldn't be a rematch. But I would suspect that whatever happens, the loser of the fight is going to seek a second fight. So they're going to be tied up with each other over the next period of time. Now, so the winner of the fight will be announced as the undisputed world champion. We'll have all the belts, take the nice pictures, probably be considered by most people as number one pound for pound. Then the question is, what happens after that? Because now you're going to have the winner of Ortiz and Stanionis, they want their shot. Boots Ennis has been waiting patiently. He's going to want his shot. There's other contenders in the other weight divisions. They're going to want their shot. And so the sanctioning bodies have all held their fire, so to speak. They've all kind of stood aside. Let's let this big mega event for our sport take place. They're not putting pressures on anybody in mandatory situations, etc. And they all know that this fight's happening. You come Monday morning after the fight, though, now you're going to have letters from promoters and lawyers and fighters, etc. Order this fight, order that fight. So it's totally conceivable, in my opinion, that if they do have a second fight between Spence and Crawford, that when that second fight happens, there'll at least be one of the belts will go away, perhaps two. I mean, in other words, the winner will still come into a rematch, with a sanctioning body belt. If you even care about that, the winner is going to be pound for pound and certainly the lineal champion. But whether they can maintain the four and whether they'll want to maintain the four, they'll have proven their point. Remember, you keep all those belts and they all cost a lot of money to maintain when you're paying sanctioning fees that are percentages of the money that you make. So I don't know if the rematch will have all the belts involved. At this point, I don't, who cares, to be quite honest with you. The idea is let's see them fight each other. The winner will be them undisputed. And then we start over again and see what happens after that.
What do you think is going to be the difference on the night, Dan?
It's a good question, man. I mean, they both have everything it takes. They both have heart. They both have experience. They both have good chins. They both have punching power. They both have great amateur pedigree. They both have heart, will. I mean, the difference is so small. That's why it's such a great fight, because anybody that knows anything about these two guys, I think, even if they're, let's say you really think that Crawford is going to win, or you really think that Spence is going to win, anybody that's paying attention would have to probably acknowledge that the other guy is certainly capable of winning the fight also. And I don't want to get too dramatic about it. It is our times Leonard Hearns. Now, granted, Leonard Hearns, that's a long time ago in the early 80s when they fought for the first time. They were young at the time, in their 20s. I want to say Ray was 23, and I want to say that Hearns was 26. Obviously, in the case of Crawford and Spence, they're already into their, in their 30s, approaching mid-30s, let's say. So they're in a different space in their careers. But there's so many things that they both do well, same like Leonard and Hearns. And then when that fight was happening, if you go and go back and read the pre-fight material, I was a kid when it happened, so I remember some of that build-up. There was tons of people that thought Ray was going to win the fight. Tons of people that thought Tommy was going to win the fight. And it turned out to be an all-time classic. If this fight comes even, 50, 60% of that, we're going to just enjoy the fight. What the difference will be, man, when the bell rings, shit happens, So I wish I could tell you, because if I knew, I would run to the sports book and I'd bet all my money on the outcome. But I see, and I listen to some of the comments from Errol, who has spoken about why he is not upset and totally understands why Crawford has been installed as a slight favorite. And I get that, and I agree with that, because Crawford has been a little more active. He hasn't had the layoffs and the injuries. And even though Errol within the welterweight division certainly has a better overall resume, you can't discount all the things that Crawford has done in moving up the weights. And I think some people think that if you had to really get down and you're splitting hairs at the super level like that in terms of intangibles, maybe Crawford has like a tiny little bit more. It's got more of that dogged determination, like to just go in there and do damage a little more so than maybe Errol. So I guess, that might be the deciding factor, I guess, that who really wants it more when it comes down to those late rounds. But who knows, man? Who knows?
That week itself, Dan, the boxing world is being doubly treated, because earlier on in the week, we obviously have a terrific fight between Stephen Fulton and Inoue. Again, just a fantastic bout, which everybody's looking forward to. What are you expecting from that one out in Japan?
That's a great fight also. I mean, I think that's one of the best fights on the calendar. Besides Crawford Spence, that's probably the fight that's on the schedule that I personally am most looking forward to. So that fight's in Japan, so which means here in the United States, I know you guys in the UK are used to this, but for us, it'll be probably like around 6 in the morning or something like that, or 5 in the morning, I guess. Like, that's one of the times, like, there's been a lot of fights that we're fortunate to get available on our platforms here in America that take place in Japan. A lot of them on ESPN Plus. Being honest, a lot of times I sleep in, and when I wake up, I watch the fight without knowing the result. I'm setting my alarm for Inoue and Fulton. I'm getting up early for that one, no doubt about it. It's a great matchup. You have the undisputed bantamweight champion, Inoue, who vacated the titles, who's, I guess I would say at worst, he's like, number 3 on the pound for pound list. And he's not just going to a new weight class and taking on some regular guy. He's going to the new weight class and he's taking on literally the number 1 guy. I don't think there's any argument at this moment in time that the number 1 fighter at 122 is Stephen Fulton, who's got 2 of the titles and has put together, in recent years, a pretty good resume. And here's a guy in Fulton. He's not like scared to go to Japan. He wanted this. Like he pushed it, like his people. They were going to try to make a rematch between him and Brandon Figueroa. He was like, I have no problem fighting Figueroa, but I want Inoue. That's what I want. I mean, it's a much bigger fight in terms of the money. It's a much bigger fight in terms of what your legacy if you win. And it's such a great matchup. He was super excited. And not to continually name drop, but I also had a recent interview with Fulton for our podcast, which we haven't posted yet, which we will do so probably next week. But the sense of excitement in his voice about going to Japan to do this fight and do it even in front of his home fans and sort of prove them wrong. Like this guy, in my mind, is just completely fearless about going over to Japan. And he knows what his skills are. And he knows he's tangling with one of the best fighters in boxing, one of the great, maybe body punchers of all time. But again, this has been a great year for boxing so far. I mean, I know there's a lot of shit we can dump all over and terrible things that happen and a lot of nonsense that goes on with fights that don't get made and then back and forth between promoters that act like, that they don't care or they get in each other's case about stuff and all the, the social media negotiations that go on and the ridiculous stuff that's been happening or not happening, I should say, in the heavyweight division. But the rest of the sport, if you can have Naoya Inoue against Stephen Fulton and Errol Spence against Terrence Crawford in the span of a week, plus we've already had Tank Davis against Ryan Garcia and Benavidez against Plant, and we've had Lomachenko against Devin Haney, and we had Josh Taylor against Teofimo Lopez, and we've got Oscar Valdez challenging Emmanuel Navarrete coming up in August. I mean, I could go on and on. That's 2, 3, 4 of those fights, but I'm naming like 6, 7, 8 fights. I mean, it's just a tremendous year for the sport. And most of the companies are putting their best foot forward, making the best fights that they can. And Inoue and Fulton is like a gift from the heavens in my mind. It's a beautiful fight and I can't wait for it.
Yeah, certainly been a great year so far. Obviously, plenty more great fights to come.
Listen, I know, Andy, we do some interviews sometimes and we get on here and I bitch and moan and we complain and we throw, stones at everybody because they're fucking things up. Can't really do that right now for the most part. I mean, in terms of what we're talking about. I mean, we can get to that with the heavyweights, but putting them to the side, everything is peaches and cream right now, it seems to me.
That was what I was about to say, Dan. We're mentioning the heavyweights fair. It's
now we're going
division, yeah. It's the only division which is frustrating everybody, the hardcores, the casuals, whoever you want to be. Everybody just wants to see those big fights, the undisputed between Fury-Usyk, Joshua-Wilder, Saudi Arabia looking to put up these fights. We're looking at Joshua-Whyte for August 12th now. Just before we come on to that Saudi Arabia deal, as I mentioned, Joshua-Whyte there, it seems to be that he's going to be announced within certainly the coming days. Just your understanding of where things currently stand on that and your thoughts on that fight.
I mean, as long as Anthony Joshua is not yet fighting Wilder, which I guess is what they're all trying to accomplish for the end of the year in that Saudi Arabian situation, and he's going to take another fight, partly to stay active, partly to continue his studies, if you will, with his new trainer Derek James. Like, that's a pretty good fight. It's certainly a more interesting fight than the Jermaine Franklin fight. And I didn't have a problem with the Jermaine Franklin fight. That was, to me, coming off 2 losses, that seemed like a perfectly reasonable fight. A lot of people thought that Franklin, had, even though he had lost, that he deserved the win. So now you're taking on Dillian Whyte, who's obviously a popular figure in the UK. He's got a big name. He's been one of the top heavyweight contenders for many years. Losing to Tyson Fury, there's no, you shouldn't be downgraded because you lost to the number 1 heavyweight in boxing in a world championship fight. So I think that's a pretty good matchup. I mean, it's not the big one, but again, those are being hopefully put together. So yes, I think that will happen. Obviously, I think everybody that follows this knows that Dillian was very outspoken because he had accepted the fight, but when they sent him the actual paperwork, Matchroom Boxing had to put a rematch language in the contract, which he was very much against for his own reasons. Apparently, that's been taken out, and other than that, he was okay with the deal. He agreed to, he didn't say the exact figure, but what he viewed as short money just to get the opportunity. Remember, he had lost to Joshua right before Joshua won his first world title, so he's looking for revenge and, still a pretty big fight. So if in fact the contract that was given to him was what he accepted and everything was the same, except now they've taken out the rematch language, it seems like that fight will get done. As you are told, I am told August 12th is the date. Eddie Hearn has said that many times. As a midsummer heavyweight fight, as we look forward to what are hopefully bigger ones at the end of the year, that's pretty good, don't you think?
Certainly is. What's your understanding of that end of year heavyweight bonanza in Saudi Arabia? I've seen Frank Warren's comments. He doesn't expect to see Fury Usyk next, certainly in December. We're seeing all this talk of Fury-Ngannou as well. What's your understanding of where things currently sit with Saudi, Fury-Ngannou, amongst other talk there?
So, I mean, here's the thing. It's like not everybody is just talking to somebody about doing one specific fight. What happens is any of these fighters and their management promoters, they engage in conversation about more than one fight, and they try to work out the best deal that they can get. So like, for example, Joshua feels like he's going to get this thing done with White, but there's still, I know, 100% been still ongoing conversation of trying to make the end of the year fight between him and Wilder. That's obviously a huge fight. Usyk has the fight with Dubois coming up. His manager, Haney-Stevenson, has come out and said, they've now recently signed with the Skills Challenge folks that are the promoters in Saudi Arabia. They say that they've agreed to all the terms and signed whatever they signed to fight Tyson Fury. Obviously, that's great, but it's still like the other guys got to sign also. So whether Fury signs or not, who the heck knows? He's always the wild card. There's lots of discussion, lots of rumors that he's not going to do that fight and that his next fight will, in fact, be some kind of hybrid fight or something to do of boxing. I'm not sure what the rules will be, but something in an exhibition with Ngannou, which, I mean, there will be some people that are interested in that. Personally speaking, I'm sort of like, I mean, I'll watch it, but it's certainly not my number one choice. I can't get too pumped up about it. We've seen so many times what happens when the UFC or MMA fighters come into boxing. They may be tremendous at what they do in the cage. Boxing is a different sport. And if you're coming into their sport, yes, there are similarities, but it usually doesn't work out very well for the fighter from the MMA background. It would be the same case, I would assume, if Tyson Fury or any other great boxer would go and have a fight in the cage. Now, if you talk about hybrid rules, I'm not sure what that means. Are they going to let them kick? Are they going to just use smaller gloves? Is it going to be a cage and not a ring? We have to wait and see if this actually comes to pass. What are the rules of engagement before you can really make an assessment? But either way, it's not going to be an official fight from what I understand. Will be an exhibition. And there'll be some segment of the fan base that'll be very interested in it. But I don't know about you, but seeing Tyson Fury against Francis Ngannou certainly does not replace, for me, the notion of him fighting Alexander Usyk for the undisputed title, or fighting Anthony Joshua, or fighting any top heavyweight for that matter. So it's more of a sideshow, and I get it. It's a business, and he'll make a lot of money from it. Good for him. Doesn't mean I have to be interested or love it.
Would you expect to see Fury and Ngannou next stand from what your understanding is?
I mean, it feels like that's what's going to be next. I have talked to a few people that are in and around, the Fury chaos, if you will, and they think that's what's happening. But it's not necessarily 100%. And you know as well as I do, and anybody that follows, Tyson Fury could be on that path and they're getting ready to do it, and suddenly he changes his mind and something else comes up. And so you can never be sure with Mr. Fury until the ink is signed on the contract.
Dan, last week, the boxing world was left in shock and surprise when we saw Canelo and Canelo-Charlo announced. If anyone can announce a shock fight, it certainly seems to be Showtime PBC. Just kind of, did you have any inkling it was going to be Jamal and not Jamal?
Beforehand, absolutely not. And I don't think anybody did except the people that were immediately involved. After the fact, when you start making your calls and exchanging your texts and your emails and digging in with different people that are involved, and you talk to them and you get a feel for what happened. At that point, then it became apparent that this was always a possibility, even though it was not the priority. So I can explain that a little bit more if you want.
No, I think people will grab that one and understand it. But just with that fight, it's a big ask for anybody to jump up 2 weights, never mind facing somebody who many still have in their top listing with the pound-for-pound rankings. Do you give Canelo-Charlo a chance, or is he very much back against the wall?
I mean, I think you have to give him a chance. I mean, look, is Canelo the favorite? Is Canelo supposed to win? Of course. Don't forget, Canelo spent a long chunk of his career in the junior middleweight division also. And Charlo has emerged as the #1 fighter in recent years in the junior middleweight division. It's not like he's just a nobody. He's the undisputed champion in the 154-pound weight class. He has one extremely close loss. He has the draw, obviously, with Castaño, which he avenged. The loss that he had against Tony Harrison, he avenged by knockout. And he's a really good fighter. But yeah, of course, Canelo Alvarez is going to be the favorite. And I would be saying all these exact same things if he was fighting Jermall Charlo instead. The only difference is that Jermall is a little bit bigger and has been fighting for the last few years in the middleweight division. Of course, he was also a champion in the junior middleweight division. So to me, it's not that big of a change. I mean, people do I understand weight classes matter, and there's a reason why there's weight classes in boxing, but it doesn't always make that big of a difference. So I think that he'll be able to handle that. He's coming off a long layoff, although not as long as his brother would have been. What really came down to was that you had the Canelo Alvarez making the agreement with PBC and signing with them for 3 fights with Al Haymon. And then, of course, they have a list of opponents that they can work with that are in their fold. And that's, we know the names of David Benavidez, of David Morrell, both Charlo brothers, Demetrius Andrade, Errol Spence down the road, Caleb Plant if he rebounds, etc. But those are the names that are there. That's not a secret. When it came to decide, okay, what are we doing for the first fight in the fall in September? It was going to be Jermall Charlo. That was the plan, 100%. So much so that when Tszyu had defeated Carlos Ocampo a few weeks ago, everybody on Team Tszyu, everybody in PBC land, everybody at Showtime, everybody was making plans and talking about we're going forward and doing this fight. Remember, it had been postponed from January. Charlo was still injured. There had been injured. He was going through some personal issues, but the plan was we're going to have this fight in the fall. It was only soon after Canelo signed with Haymon that it became, again, I'm learning this after the fact. It was always going to be Jermall Charlo, but they knew that because of his issues, what's happening is he's going through a terrible, terrible divorce and custody battle. That means you got things to do. You got a lot of things to deal with in your personal life with hearings and litigation, and it's not conducive to training for a fight, particularly if you're going in the ring with one of the best fighters in boxing. It got to a point where when you finally have to make the call, whether it was Jermall bowing out or his brother saying, "What are you going to do?" or Haymon exerting a little pressure, whatever it was, the reality was he was not going to be ready to fight in September. And at that point, Jermall Charlo took the place of his brother. Before that occurred, it was sort of like maybe he's got a 30% chance to be in the fight. And this is things I was hearing from those folks involved after the fact when it was made. So he was always a consideration, but 100% they were moving in the direction to do the fight against Jermall Charlo, and Jermall was supposed to do the long scheduled fight against Tszyu. Obviously, plans change. It's a fluid situation.
Dan, straight back into it. Apologies for that. Obviously, we was about the time out there on this call. We talked about Canelo, obviously coming up with his bout with Charlo. You mentioned something else which I do want to touch on, but just looking at Canelo's deal with PBC, is there any understanding as to which fights they will be out of all of those names you've just mentioned? Are there certain fights which are maybe being pushed a little more, certain fights which might even be in the contract, which are kind of going down in a list as to what he should expect?
My understanding of that is that whatever the paperwork is that he signed, there are names identified in that paperwork, and those are the group of fighters that they will work off of. As I mentioned before, we know who are the top fighters in and around his weight class are, and I think that if he's got 3 fights, and the first fight is going to be against Jermall Charlo, there'll be 2 more to go, and I don't think they've decided, at least between them. I mean, Canelo probably has an idea of who he'd like to fight. I'm sure that Al Haymon and the other folks that are involved, Showtime, etc., have an idea of the types of fights they would like to see. I think I probably, and I don't make a habit of this, but I think I'll speak for boxing fans in general. Of course, we want to see the David Benavidez fight, as long as, he keeps doing what he's been doing. Hopefully that will be one of those 3 fights, but the other options are not necessarily bad ones. It's that, to me, it seems illogical if you're signing Canelo Alvarez to what obviously is a very lucrative contract for 3 fights, and you're not going to make, at least in my estimation, obviously the biggest fight of them all in terms of what it can generate in financial returns and publicity and excitement and legacy and all the things that go into making a big event. Obviously, David Benavidez is the guy right now. He's the clear it's not even close to me. He's the #1 contender. Forget about the fact that he has a interim title belt that puts him in a great position for the titles. I'm talking about he's the, we talk about sometimes there's the people's champion. Well, he's the people's #1 contender, David Benavidez, and hopefully Canelo will fight that fight. Now, Canelo has shown throughout his career a willingness to fight all the top guys. He may not necessarily do them in the exact order that we would like, but he has fought all the top guys. And, I'm going to give Canelo Alvarez the benefit of the doubt. Let him have his fight with Charlo, and he'll have 2 more fights left. I'm assuming that will take place over the coming year and a half or so. And hopefully Benavidez is one of those guys.
Where do things currently stand with David Benavidez in his next fight, Dan? Obviously, there's a lot of reports come out. It would be Morrell Jr. stepping between the ropes and sharing the ring with him next. Since then, Benavidez and his father both come out denying that's the case. But what's your understanding? Where is David Benavidez going next?
Well, that wasn't really reports. That was my report. That's what that was. So my report was not based on, secret sources or anything like that. My story about that was actually quotes from the promoter of David Benavidez, which is Samson Lukowitz. It was quotes from the co-promoter of David Morrell, which is Leon Margulies from Warriors Boxing. And they said that they were working towards that fight, that they had an agreement in principle. Showtime told me that's what they were planning for. And obviously that's a great fight. This is right around the time that Canelo was either in talks with them or had just signed or was just about to sign, whatever. And so then, of course, Benavidez came out and said they didn't have a deal. When I went back with them, they're still hoping to make that fight. But now that the Canelo situation has come to PBC, perhaps neither guy wants to take that gamble because they might think that the loser won't get the shot at Canelo, which, I guess that's the possibility. It's unfortunate that's what happens. But I still have some hope that they will end up fighting each other. That's still an excellent fight. That's still a fight that they would probably, based on what they'd have to guarantee each fighter, be able to, reap a profit as a pay-per-view event. And that's where we're at. So 100% they were in the process of making that fight. That's something that PBC was doing, something that Showtime wanted, something that the 2 promoters had said that they were working on and were had an agreement. And I don't think they would. I know that they wouldn't do that if they didn't have the authorization from the boxers to go forward, because they would have to know what those guys were going to get. So, but sometimes that happens and then things get put on hold as they make their way with this new situation with Canelo joining the family, let's say.
Unfortunately, that does seem like a frustrating situation. If we don't get to see that fight, knowing Canelo is potentially an offer for either man. But another man you mentioned earlier is Tszyu. You obviously have to feel sorry for Tim. He's been waiting for that chance at undisputed. Nobody quite knows what's going to be happening next. Do you have any idea as to where things sit with Tim? Obviously, holds that WBO interim title. What will happen? Will he be looking to fight for an upgraded version, for the full version? Will he just be upgraded, or does he go down a different path now?
That's a very good question. I don't have any inside intel on that. Like I do sometimes. I have reached out to the Tszyu people in the last couple of days. I have not heard back from them. Hopefully they'll return my messages and my texts and all. My question is whatever happens with Tim, he is the interim champion, which is in the WBO is going to makes him the mandatory for the title. My question is, now that Charlo has signed to do this fight against Canelo Alvarez, what are the organizations going to do? Are they going to let him keep all 4 belts and go through with the fight and be able to so-called enter the ring as the undisputed champion? Or are they going to say, listen, you're leaving the division. Your next fight is in a different weight class. You haven't defended the title, never defended the title since he became undisputed. That's going to be by the time the Canelo fight happens, a year and a half ago or so. He's never defended it. He had obviously the hand injury. And the question is, will those other mandatory challenges force the hand with the organizations? Tszyu is with the WBO. Look, they've owed this guy Bakram an IBF mandatory. I've lost track of how long that's been going on. They made a deal with Bakram's people, and they have put him on other PBC undercards to keep him busy and paid him nicely to step aside, at least 2 times that I can think of. At some point, you're either going to give him the title shot or not. And so the organizations have some reckoning to do. Are they going to let this sort of play out until the fight between Canelo and Charlo happens? Or are they going to say, okay, we're going to go and do what we've got to do, which is, you can vacate, or we're going to relieve you of the belts and we're going to make the fights and keep our title active? That question has not been answered yet. And I'm waiting to hear what the sanctioning bodies have to say on that situation.
Away from Tim and just dropping down a few weights, we've obviously seen Devin Haney Shakur Stevenson sharing a few choice words over social media in the last 24 hours or so. What's your understanding of all of that and where things sit in a potential fight between Devin and Shakur?
Well, first of all, Devin's the undisputed champion in the lightweight division, and Shakur Stevenson is his #1 mandatory challenger by virtue of his final elimination victory that happened in his most recent fight. So at some point, the WBC will order that fight. That's a great matchup. I mean, that's a very, very high class fight. They're both tremendous boxers. They both are pound for pound level fighters. They've been doing their back and forth talk, which, you know, I guess would try to, if they do come to pass and fight each other, it's helping pump it up and hype it up and all. But it does kind of get boring when you have fighters on social media arguing about what the percentage of a fight is. I mean, if it's a mandatory fight, the WBC has the splits in their rule book. Obviously, if they want to do the fight, you know, talk to your people, have them sit down like business people and negotiate a deal and see what it is. So, you know, it's boring reading, you know, I want 75% and no, that's not enough. Okay, whatever. Do your business and let me know when the fight's made. I don't think that fight's going to happen in the immediate future, but a lot of it's going to depend on Haney, which is what's your situation? Are you going to try to stay with Top Rank, which is the promoter of Shakur Stevenson, who then could help facilitate the match? Because if he goes to Eddie or he goes to PBC or he goes to Frank Warren or Golden Boy or wherever, it's going to make that much more complicated in terms of broadcasters. Not to say it can't happen, but I don't believe that in terms of the marketability and the money that fight can generate, it's big enough yet where it would be, okay, we'll do a joint pay-per-view or something like that. So if the fight's going to happen, a couple of things have to take place. One, he's got to decide, am I staying at lightweight or am I going to junior welterweight? Obviously, we know he's had issues making 135 pounds. He's been talking about moving up for, you know, since even before he was even won his first belt. So that's the first thing. What is your weight class going to be? Are you going to fight at lightweight or are you going to fight at junior welterweight? If he decides I'm going to fight at lightweight, now it's okay. Am I going to go back and try to make a new deal with Top Rank, which is certainly interested in returning his services? I think that Devin had a good experience working with Top Rank. They obviously gave him the Lomachenko fights. They were involved in the Kambosos fight. I mean, he's made the most money in his career fighting in the Top Rank fights. So that's what he's got to decide. And once he's made those decisions, at that point, then they can start to negotiate and discuss it. Because even besides Shakur Stevenson, there are other fighters that he could theoretically fight. Shakur is obviously that's a great matchup, though. I'd love to see that. I'm not sure it's ready yet. I mean, it's got potential to be a huge, huge mega fight. I'd be less than honest if I said it's ready to be made. Now, I would still like to see it because it's not my money, but I understand where the guys would be coming from. Where I know I'm not big on marinating fights, but that one really, frankly, could use a little bit of seasoning still before it's ready to go.
Just knowing that they've been so active over social media, we saw that video of Shakur and Devin at some form of like a party where the sign the contract billboard was kind of sent across to Devin as well. Do you have any like kind of understanding again, Dan, if maybe talks have progressed or are at least ongoing between Top Rank and Devin and Bill Haney and then with Shakur to try and make a fight? Hence why they talk about 25%. In maybe Top Rank saying this is the part we'd have to work with, and maybe Devin's going to Shakur saying like, all right, Top Rank are offering this for us to split. I'm taking that amount. You can take that.
I don't think they're there yet. I mean, Bob Arum, this is not like something that's like behind the scenes. It's been very public that Bob has met with Bill Haney to talk about things. They have a very cordial relationship. Obviously, they've worked together for the last few fights, and it's business. And, you know, I think actually in the WBC rules, Shakur would be entitled to more than 25% anyway on the purse bid. So the 25% is nonsense in my mind. But I don't believe it's progressed to the point where they're exchanging paperwork or there's offers or anything, because Devin Haney's got to figure out what he wants to do. Are you committed to fighting at lightweight? Let us know, and then we can move forward and try to negotiate a fight. If you're not going to fight at lightweight, let's say he wants to stay with Top Rank and fight at junior welterweight. Okay, well then we'll talk about fights in that weight class that we can make against. They have other opponents that they can match them up with in that weight class. So, you know, it all starts with Haney in where he wants to fight weight wise. I think you're getting a little bit ahead of yourself right now.
Oh, I'm
Which
sorry.
is what you do. Okay, it's no problem.
I just get excited thinking about all these fights.
I get excited too.
I'm being too greedy, Dan, thinking of another fantastic fight with so many on the horizon. But just to final topic, I'm interested just again to get your thoughts on is Conor Benn. Speaking to Tony Sims, he expects to see the UCAD case rolled up next week. Just with Conor, there's been a lot of talk about who he could come back and face if they get the green light and he does return. there was obviously some talks of him potentially facing the likes of a Manny Pacquiao or fighters over in the States. Have you heard anything about who those fighters stateside might be if a Eubank Jr. fight can't be made for Conor?
Well, there was definitely some conversation about the possibility of the Pacquiao fight, but my understanding is that the Pacquiao fight ever materialized, which personally I hope it doesn't, that it wouldn't be in the United States. It would probably be a Middle East kind of fight, I guess. If it did happen in the United States, I mean, I don't really see that being the kind of fight that's going to have a huge draw or a big pay-per-view. I mean, all due respect to Manny Pacquiao, one of the all-time greatest fighters of all, ever. I mean, that ever put on gloves, had a chance to cover, all of his big fights. Just a great fighter and a great person. But his time has passed. I mean, it happens to everybody. I mean, and Conor Benn has no fan base in America. He may be a popular figure in Europe, even if he's a villain now at this point because of everything that's gone on, but people will still want to see him. I mean, most people here in the States probably don't even know who he is. They know Nigel Benn probably more than they know Conor Benn. So, I don't see what the magic is to that fight. I think a lot of it's going to depend on what's the status of the drug test situation. Is he going to get a license? Is he going to make a settlement with UCOD? Is he going to have to serve an additional suspension? I mean, he obviously hasn't fought for a while, but he has not officially been sanctioned in the sense that, okay, you're suspended for a year or 6 months. Obviously, they can give him time served plus whatever. I think a lot of that's up in the air, and that's more a question, I think, Andy, for the lawyers than for your humble boxing correspondent right here.
That's fair enough, Dan. And we've certainly kept each other busy. Well, it's evening for me, or it's nighttime rather for me. And it's I imagine it's getting to about evening time for you now. So I appreciate you jumping on and doing this Zoom call. Obviously, enjoy what's left of your day. And I will see you soon. Thank you for speaking to me. And it's been a pleasure, Dan.
Always a pleasure. Thanks a lot, Andy.